This half hour, joining us in the studio once again is Representative Dave Maturen, 63rd District, Michigan, here in the Southwest. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning.
Welcome back. Boy,
Pleasure to be here.
It is we had a rough weekend, didn't we? Man.
We certainly did, yes, for both the Kalamazoo and Battle Creek communities.
That's for sure. And, it took a while, I guess, for us for law enforcement to realize what was going on, at least that these incidents were connected. But, it's incredible to fathom what's gone on. It's this time here in our community. But as a legislator, when you hear these things happen, do you feel like you have to go back to Lansing and try and legislate some kind of solution? I mean, what goes through your mind?
Well, you first of all, your thoughts and prayers go out to the folks that were impacted by it and their families. And things are still playing out.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're still finding out more about what happened that night, about the fact that he was picking up fares in the middle of his rampage. I don't want to jump to conclusions and rush off, and let's put some legislation out there. I think we need to take time, look at all the facts that surround it. I don't know if there's a legislative cure for something like that happens. Random things like this. Obviously, the person probably wasn't in his right mind. I don't know if there's a legislative cure for that type of an activity.
Right, exactly. I guess that, it might make a person feel like if they could just wave a wand and correct that problem somehow, boy, you'd like to. But I think you have the clear perspective on that it's just hard to do.
I think it's it's hard to do. It's hard to predict. You can't predict acts like this. We read about them all over the world. You don't think it's going to happen in our Southwest Michigan community, but when it does, it's certainly a shock. Hopefully something we can learn from this. But again, let's let all the facts play out. Let's let the law enforcement authorities do their proper investigation, see if there's anything at all that we can learn from this.
Mm-hmm. Well, among the other things that we have on our list to talk about, boy, it's quite a list. In fact, you talked about this a little bit last time, but the budget thing is always a review going on and a discussion going on at this point.
Well, the governor put his budget out a while back. It's up to the House and the Senate to come up with our versions of it and see what we agree with and see what we don't agree with, or things we'd like to see additionally. The budget essentially is the statement of priorities for the governor and the House and the Senate. So we're looking at our sets of priorities, things we'd like to see. And hopefully, again, what would be the 6th year in a row, get the budget done on time, actually before time, so all of the folks that are impacted by the budget will have a better idea what the revenues are.
Is there a sense there'll be a battle on this, or do you think we're finding common ground here?
I think this budget should be relatively, I don't say benign, they never are, but, that's some of the big issues to talk about are perhaps supplements for the city of Flint.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the Detroit Public Schools issue to deal with. So that will be something we'll be talking about. And I know that the House leadership has a little different opinion on how we want to approach Detroit.
We'll talk about that coming up in just a second on WBCK with Representative Dave Maturen. Morning. We're talking today with Representative Dave Maturen. So, Flint, there's been some money that's already been earmarked for lead pipe replacement in Flint, right? And you expect there's going to be more of that talk?
I'm not quite sure where all the money is going. I think the fact that some folks expect the state of Michigan to pay for a complete replacement of all the pipes in Flint, I don't think that's going to happen. Right now, obviously, the immediate concern is, again, getting fresh water, so when people turn on their tap, they can drink it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the case. I've heard there's been some of the money, it's going to go for some pipe replacement, but I think a wholesale replacement, everything in Flint it's just not in the cards.
Why not?
Well, I think one of those things is the fact of the matter that infrastructure generally is a local government priority. I mean, and there are lots of communities in this state that have replaced their infrastructure on a yearly basis. They'll take a look at the older lines and replace them. It appears, but I'm not sure because all of the information's not in. It appears that Flint just wasn't doing that. They were relying on this caking on the interior of the pipe to protect the interface between the water and the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's kind of rolling the dice, hoping and praying that that's going to stay intact and not come off. Obviously, it did. Obviously, there's culpability to go all around the city, the state, and the federal government.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and somebody's listening to this now, someone out there probably saying, the state knew about this, these problems existed and were not acted upon as fastidiously perhaps as they could have been, and so the state should pay for that. How do you respond to that?
Well, again, it's the local, the government is supposed to maintain its infrastructure.
Yeah.
Many times we fail to look at infrastructure. We obviously when we looked at the roads, I mean, you can tell they're falling apart just by driving on them.
Yeah,
but you can't
right.
tell what's below the surface of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So those are areas that we know because of the age. There's wear and tear and physical deterioration. Depreciation is an appraisal term. Deterioration.
Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
It does. Yes, it does. After all those years, but it's something that. Certainly, there's some culpability there with the state, but replacing one's infrastructure is something that should fall on the back of the city, the burden of the city. Unfortunately, Flint doesn't have any money. That's one of the reasons they have an emergency manager there, is because the fiscal conditions. So, if they're going to be doing replacement, other methods are going to have to come up, be it federal government, community service organizations, whatever it might be. That's just my opinion. Again, I think there's still a lot of data. I know there's an engineering study out there to determine exactly which pipes, where they are, that type of stuff. So to rush to judgment and say wholesale replace everything, I just think is not the appropriate thing to do. It's not the fiscally responsible thing to do. So let's let the engineering study take its course. Let's see what can occur. Let's see what other solutions folks might have.
Is there concern, too, that if the state pays for wholesale replacement in Flint, this could tip over a bunch of dominoes around the state where, like Detroit, for example, could say, hey, we don't have any money either. Help us.
Certainly. I mean, I would, if I was another city that had the same problem, I'd say, well, pony up the money for us, too. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter is you have communities with relatively high level of lead, apparently not enough beyond the 15 parts per billion, but you've got some folks that are close to that, and shouldn't their pipes be replaced also? Interesting to note the World Health Organization says 10 parts per billion, so EPA says 15 parts per billion.
Right.
So I think we've neglected our infrastructure for a long time. I think the governor made that clear in his State of the State address that we really need to take a look at all of those things, especially the things we can't see, and take a look at what's the status of those. How do we go about finding the money in a relatively tight fiscal, arena to do that kind of replacement?
Mm-hmm. What have you heard around the district as it relates to this? I mean, have you had constituents say to you, how do we know what's in our water? I mean, have you had that kind of response?
Not a whole lot. I mean, some folks are concerned about it. I know some of the newspapers have had some information about what the lead levels are in certain cities, and I think there's some concern for folks. Obviously, there is, and I guess I'd advise them if they had a concern to get their water tested. But it just brings things like this to light issues that we normally kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, in that regard, then, is the broader issue trying to inspire municipalities to get with it as far as their infrastructure is concerned?
Well, it's easier said than done. All we have to do is just find the money. Yeah. And with property tax revenues, and we can talk a little bit about that coming up, but there's a minimal increase this year in the taxable value increase. So communities are not going to see a huge infusion of cash to go ahead and spend on this, but yet it still is a necessary basic function of local units of government. Infrastructure maintenance is really a key issue that locals should be involved in.
We're talking with Representative Dave Maturen, 8:20 Monday morning. Representative Dave Maturen is here with us. We're talking about real estate issues. These, of course, this is your ballywick, as they say, your business. And so we were just discussing property tax assessments and boards of review and things like that. I saw it on mine right there. It said you have a question or you want to have this reviewed, here's your procedure. It's right there on the statement.
Right. They when you get your assessment notice, they tell you when and where the board review is going to be. Usually encourage you to make an appointment, things like that. So it's certainly an open process, and every individual property owner has an opportunity to go ahead and make his or her case.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of seminars coming up that I'm going to be involved in. One is at the Battle Creek Association of Realtors. It's on February 29th from 9 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock in the morning.
Just a week away, yeah.
Right, a week away, and they can call the folks at the BCAR office, 962-5193, if they want further information about that. There's also a Property Tax Town Hall. Representative John Bizon and myself are going to be doing a joint town hall meeting on assessment appeal issues March 2nd at KCC Binda Theater, 450 North Avenue. They can call either my office, 844 Maturen, or Representative Bizon's office, 517-373-0555 for further information. But again, both of those are free opportunities for folks to come in and question and myself, assessors, appraisers that we're going to have on panels to get their answers about effective appeal of one's property assessment.
Why would somebody appeal it? Because they think it's too high or not high enough? Those probably are the main reasons, I guess.
Well, occasionally people appeal it because they don't think it's high enough, but I think there might be an ulterior motive. They think maybe if they're going to sell it, they can get a higher sale price out of it. I'm not sure what would go into somebody's mind. But, generally, you got two values. You've got your state equalized value and the taxable value.
Right.
And in fact, the multiplier this year from last year to this year is 1.003. In other words, 0.3% increase. So there's a minimal increase this year in taxable value for the average property owner. Now, if you added something to your house, you put an addition on or a new garage or something like this, then you can expect your taxable value to go up more than that. But we'll have a panel of experts, again, assessors, attorneys, appraisers. Myself, I'm a former real estate appraiser. Well, actually still do some real estate appraising, and former assessors. So folks, I think, have a lot of knowledge, and people would benefit from coming to those two seminars to give them some coaching, some ideas on what to do if they do feel the need to appeal their assessment.
And it's probably kind of a yin-yang thing when you see that pop up, because you say, hey, you know what, that means my value should be higher. On the other hand, that means I'm paying more taxes. But does that always mean that? I mean, if your assessment is up, your value is up?
Well, if you're talking assessment, state equalized value, that may be going up. In fact, some of the units of government, there's going to be an increase, 2, 3, 4, 5% on average because property values are going up. You mentioned recent purchase of a home. There is a tight supply that affects, obviously, the less amount of supply there is, the more there's a tendency to push up values. So I think we are seeing values in general, not everywhere, but in general going up. So you'll likely see your state equalized value go up a fair amount, whereas your taxable value is going up 0.3%.
Yep. All right. Quickly before we go here, a quick dark store update. We talked a little bit about this and have over the last few visits.
Well, it's certainly an issue that impacts a lot of communities, and we've had two hearings before the House Tax Policy Committee. I've chaired a work group. We've had 3 meetings and finally got some legislation in the hopper, so to speak. Talked to the folks from the Legislative Service Bureau. They're the ones that actually sit down and write the law. So gave them some ideas as what kind of changes I'd like to see to make the system, I think, a fairer system, a better system than what we currently have now. And we'll wait and see what language they come back, hopefully this week or next week. Get it back in the draft form, take a look at that, and see what we can do from there. So.
And just in case someone missed what that means, this is a big box store that situates itself in a community and then, by some interpretations, attempts to wiggle out of tax revenue.
Well, yeah, they might say that this is perfectly fine and fair, but I think most of us would think that there's some approaches to value that are just not being applied, that are applied to everyone else, that aren't being applied to these big box retail stores. I don't know how much time you got. We can go into an example, but The fact of the matter is that a lot of folks out there think the system needs to be kind of brought back to where it had been, looking at three legitimate approaches to value, like you do when you get your mortgage for your house. They look at three approaches to value, especially a new house, things like that. So.
Okay, fair enough. If folks have questions for you or they want to reach you, maybe talk to you about these seminars, that sort of thing, how do they find you?
Well, we got a toll-free number at the office, 844-Maturen. So 844 and my last name, Maturen.
All right, easy enough. Dave, we'll catch up next month.
My pleasure.
Representative Dave Maturen, WBCK 820.